Aloha, everyone. My name is Mark Levin. I'm the director of the University of Hawaii at Mānoa Center for Japanese Studies, and I'm thrilled for today's event. I have to confess that I first heard from Frank Stanley. I have an email where he wrote to me and very kindly, generously introduced himself, having come back to Hawaii. And my response was, you have to understand, I'm only 6 weeks into my job at the Center for Japanese Studies. I'm now 3 years into my job at the Center for Japanese Studies, so it's almost precisely 3 years ago that we had that email exchange, and he's been away, and there's been a lot. So I'm really delighted that we have this chance. And then once Frank, if I could call you Frank, came on board, he recruited Jim Forbes to join in, so we're doubly lucky for that. And I will tell you a little bit about them, just really super briefly, and then ask them to speak about their careers. In our short time today, my plan is to spend a little bit of time asking about their careers. I know this is part of a program on careers and studies, so a little bit of time on what recommendations you all might have for current students. And then I understand there was, besides the resignation or the change of the East-West Center, there was some other news this past week, and we might touch on that. So I looked over both of your amazing resumes, and the two of you have served over 30 years in the U.S. Foreign Service. And your careers have taken you all around the world, predominantly in Asia, and both of you, I think, came into it with Asia backgrounds, but there's hardly a place in the planet that it seems like you haven't been. Another piece of what I got from reading over your paperwork that I think I hadn't completely appreciated is that you did what I would describe as the obvious pieces: trade officials, economics, public affairs, press attaché, and we could call that the diplomats on stage. But the other thing that impressed me that I hadn't spent time thinking about is how much work there was to be done and how much work you've both done backstage. That these embassies and consulates don't just happen. That there is a lot that goes on, and it goes on because talented and hardworking people are there to make it happen. So if you don't mind maybe talking a little bit about those aspects of your careers, and then we can go from there.
I'll start it, I guess, and she's talking about the aspect of what was my career. In the State Department, we have a number of different tracks: a political track, an economic track, a public diplomacy track, consular track, and what we now call a management track. It used to be called administration. And I was in the management track, which means that I take care of what we refer to as the diplomatic platform. You have an embassy, you have a building, you have property. We hire a lot of local staff, and so there's an HR aspect to it. When you have an overseas establishment, whether it's government or private industry, it's different than having an office here in the United States, because here you just take care of your employees. You don't worry about their spouses or their kids or their home or anything else. Overseas, not only government, but also the private businesses, they have to take care of the families as well. So we have housing programs. The kids need to go to school. We have to find a school. The schools have to be paid. There's budgeting, there's supply, there's contracting, there's maintenance done. So all of that is going on, and that was what I was in charge of. My last assignment before I retired was in Tokyo. Unfortunately, I was there during the earthquake disaster and Fukushima, so managing the embassy during that time was my problem. I also served in that capacity in New Delhi and in Seoul and Southeast Asia. Most of my career was spent in Asia, except for one time in Africa, which I try to forget. He does Africa, so I'll let him talk.
So that Fukushima time, you make it sound easy, and I'm sure it wasn't. In fact, what I read here was that you developed essentially a contingency plan on the fly, I'm assuming, to remove American citizens from northern Japan and move the embassy out of Tokyo if need be?
That was part of the contingency. There was also contingency to move all the Americans out of all of northern Japan. There's over 100,000 Americans living in that part of Japan. But it wasn't just us, it was us coordinating with US military, who was also involved in all of that activity after that earthquake. So we did that. We also had a lot of professionals come in from Washington to help the Japanese. We had people from CDC, from the National Science Foundation, from NIH, from the Department of Energy. We had our specialists going into the nuclear reactors that were blowing up. We had people flying around in airplanes monitoring radiation levels. And we also had to keep the American public informed of what was going on. So that was the big issue, in addition to taking care of ourselves when our building almost collapsed. And a lot of people in their homes, like lots of places in Japan, they live in high-rise apartments. So during that big earthquake, dishes flew out of the cupboards and paintings came off the walls and TVs fell down. So there were a lot of angst among the families at the time.
And then, you know, building an embassy, it's different from building an office building, I'm assuming.
Embassies are totally useless for any other purpose except an embassy. If you sell it, it's going to have to tear it down because it's absolutely a total wasted building. They have to be 100 feet from any wall, from any street, from any neighbor. They have to be very thick, reinforced walls to withstand blasts and bombs, and the windows have to be bulletproof windows and all the rest of the stuff that goes into it. So they're very expensive to operate and to maintain, and like I said, totally useless for anybody else. We build them, then they have to be torn down, and it costs a lot to tear them down.
So Frank, I'm going to take Jim's lead on this aspect of your career, which was more on the front stage, both economics, politics, press attaché, and trade. And then in that as well, it seems like you had almost this bipolar aspect of being both significantly Asia or East Asia focused, but then we pick up Baghdad, we pick up Cairo, we pick up Kabul, and more recently, as a retired officer, they're pulling you back all around Africa. How do you handle the?
Well, we have an expression in the Foreign Service that it's a great career for people who have limited attention spans and who want to save the world in one country and then move on to the next country. I'm kidding, but most of my career was spent as an economic officer in the Foreign Service in places like Japan, Korea, and Thailand. And you indicated that it's more of a front line kind of job, but in reality, it's also back office in the sense that, or I consider it back office in the sense that the most important job that economic officers have, in fact, all Foreign Service officers have, is to protect the United States, to support the United States, to help the United States. And in particular, as an economic officer, you're focused on supporting, helping American businesses, entrepreneurs, and companies. And in that sense, you're trying to help them in whatever country you're operating to address day-to-day issues or structural issues. Now, the day-to-day issues, we work very often with what's called the Foreign Commercial Service, the Commerce Department. But on the structural issues, and we saw a lot of that when I was working in Japan, we worked a lot with the U.S. Trade Representative's Office. So, but it is an important job, but it's not. But it's a low-key kind of job. That it's a constant job. Let me also point out that I was focused on the the Foreign Service for much of the time. But before I joined the Foreign Service, I got great experience as an Air Force officer that really helped me in terms of my career and has helped me today. I was an Air Force Public Affairs officer for 4 years, made captain and then got out. And then likewise, I was also an investment banker. I worked for Solomon Brothers investment banking firm for 2 years, 1 year on Wall Street and then the other in Tokyo, setting up Solomon Brothers Asia. So I was a Solomon Brothers Inc. employee at the time of the Big Bang, so 1988, 89, and we were moving there to Japan as well at that time. And so all those experiences, plus my academic background, have helped me become the person that I eventually became. And so I'm eternally grateful.
And I'm going to note, because I have it in front of me and the audience doesn't, that you were also for 6 years the sports editor of a local newspaper, a small town weekly newspaper with a circulation of 3,000.
Sure. And that's the advantage of being befriended by the owner of a chain of small town newspapers in Ohio, along the Ohio River. And in line with that, I'd like to stress to you students that you need to get out and meet people, because if you don't meet people, you're not going to find the people who are going to help you in life. The person who hired me to work on the small town newspaper, he was very important in my life. In fact, when he passed a couple of years later, I took my wife and son to his grave, and I said, this is the guy who was responsible for a lot of the things that I was able to accomplish. And so I'm eternally grateful. I could talk about all the other jobs, but that's the first critical job that I took. And so get out and meet people, and also those internships, whether they're free or not, you need to get to know people, because those people are going to be critical in helping you move on.
I'm gonna add to that whole thing about having to meet people. Frank did mention that we're all doing comparable jobs for trade and for supporting American businesses. That is one of the objectives in almost every embassy I'm aware of. And so that's it's something that we all have to do, regardless of what track we may be in. If I'm dealing with an airline, if I'm dealing with a hotel, or if I'm dealing with a construction company or whoever it is, I have to keep that in mind as well. And so we all are doing that type of work. And it all requires meeting people. The whole key to the business is to get out and to meet people and to express the points that your government has given you to express, and to try to explain what it is we're doing, if we can explain it. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes we don't know what we're doing either, but we have to give it a try. And that is what the main idea is. The building, as you were mentioned, works against that. These buildings are so tied up with security that people have a hard time coming in to see us. And so we have to get out to see them as often as we can.
Well, I guess it is semantically self-evident, but it sounds like what you're saying is that diplomats need to be diplomatic.
Diplomatic has a different connotation. Sometimes it's like we used to say, you have to learn how to lie for your country. And that is still part of the deal. You have to be a salesman in some ways, but you also have to be honest with people, and you have to make sure that you accept the realities that are out there, and you have to try to see things through their eyes as well. You cannot really express your own views or your own nation's policies unless you understand how they're being seen or how they're being received. So it goes both ways, but being diplomatic has some weird connotations.
Frank, I'm going to circle back to you. You made that short reference of short attention spans, but I am sort of curious in hearing more about this. I'm jokingly, but not entirely, calling it bipolar aspect of your career, that you have, these big pieces, and they're not it's not linear, although somewhat that's so, but these big pieces in East Asia, and then these other big pieces in the Middle East, and now more recently, big pieces in various areas of Africa. When you do what you do, is it more the same wherever you go, or how do these differences play out for you?
It's wherever I can find a job. No, it seems more linear to me. You know, really the transformation from Asia took place in around 2014, 2015. I had been the economic counselor in Tokyo. By the way, Jim and I know each other from Tokyo as well as Seoul, and he's been a mentor of mine. I wish I had taken his advice, but
I told him not to get back.
but he's always been a mentor of mine, and he continues to be a mentor of mine. But so starting in 2014, I spent 3 years in Baghdad, and then I spent 3 years in Egypt, and then my final year was 2020-21 in Kabul, Afghanistan, as the head of the economic section. And then I retired, and then I was invited back, just like Jim, but in my case, I was invited back to work basically part-time, up to 6 months out of the year, in Africa. And I had spent a tour in Egypt, and I was so impressed with that I said, you know, I want to learn more about Africa and work more in Africa in terms of either a political job or an economic job. And so I offered myself up to what's called the Africa Bureau. And so for the last 3 years after I met you, I've served in political or economic chief positions, normally in Gabon, Djibouti, South Africa, and I just returned from South Sudan about 3 weeks ago, serving about 6 months there. And so, but I consider just natural progression. It just made sense to me. And so, yeah, that's the way I would answer it.
Frank had a good experience in Egypt. My first tour was in Lagos, Nigeria, and I never wanted to go back. So I got into East Asia, and I decided I liked Asia. I spent the rest of my time there. And after I retired, like Frank, I came back and did a lot of these temporary assignments, but all of them except one were in Asia. The one outlier was in Nicaragua, which we have a political issue with the government of Nicaragua, and we had evacuated the embassy, and they were draw down. So I was considered expendable as a retiree, so they sent me into for a couple of months.
Well, let's slip back a little bit in the timeline. And Frank has already said a little bit, but maybe we can get more. But I'm curious, you know, that you had gone from the Air Force into the Foreign Service. But Jim, maybe you can go to. So why did you start? How did you start doing this in the first place?
It was weird. I was a college student. I went to school at Oregon State University. And I started off wanting to be a marine biologist. And for a couple of years, I studied science. And I wasn't very smart. And my grades were C+ in those days. But to get into oceanography, I had
That was before great inflation, though.
Yeah, before great inflation. But to get into oceanography, I still have a B+ average. So I was never going to do it. So I changed majors my junior year, went into a different track, social science track, and I had a choice of getting a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science degree. The difference was a Bachelor of Arts, I had to have a foreign language, and Bachelor of Science, I had to have a non-Western culture studies. And I was young, and I was drinking a lot of beer, and I had a lot of fun, and I didn't really want to put a lot of energy in learning a foreign language, so I decided to go to culture studies. And I took classes in Asian history and religion and that kind of stuff, and I enjoyed it. So my first opportunity, I took a trip to Japan by myself, and I kind of wandered around Japan for almost a month. I came back, and I liked it, and I decided it'd be neat to join the Department of State. There was an ad on TV, so I took the test, and I failed it. And then I joined the Peace Corps. And I expressed an interest in Asia. And they offered me a job in Korea. So I went to Korea. They gave me some language training, and I was put out into a village in Korea. People don't realize Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world back in that point. And I did public health work. And then I stayed there for an extra year working for the Peace Corps. And when I came back, I really wanted to get back overseas. So I took a job with the Defense Department. I did procurement and contracting for the Navy and kept trying to pass the foreign service tests, and went to graduate school in business. And eventually I passed the test and ended up with this career I have.
And for the record, since you didn't want to study language in college, we should note that you speak Korean and Thai fluently and have a passing knowledge of Indonesian and Japanese. So I guess some of the language.
I don't claim Japanese. She tested me already. He's Japanese. I don't.
Frank, can you tell us more about what got you into this, making to take that test, which is a pretty famously difficult test?
Actually, I didn't even know what the Foreign Service was about. I was, as I mentioned before, I was an Air Force officer, and I was the public affairs officer, or the deputy public affairs officer at Yokota Air Base. And President Reagan visited Japan in 1983 or 84. And as a part of that visit, he visited Prime Minister Nakasone's besso at Hinode-cho. And there's a famous picture on Time Newsweek of Prime Minister Nakasone and Reagan looking outside of this quaint old Japanese samurai-looking house. And so I was asked by the embassy to help out at that event. And through that event, I was befriended by the public affairs officer. She basically asked me to the embassy to have lunch with her. And I said, sure. She was very nice. Carol Ludwig, by the way. And she said during the lunch, you ought to be a foreign service officer. I said, oh, really? What is that? And I said, well, thank you very much. And for some reason, she kept on pressing me. I was getting ready to leave the Air Force, and I was going to study Japanese and move on to that. But she kept on pressing me, even when I was in the middle of nowhere, Saitama Ken prefecture, at the home of, by the way, Eiichi Shibusawa Eiichi. He was a famous Meiji-era. He created the term entrepreneur. It was jitsugyoka was the term that he created. But anyway, so I was staying at his home, actually grandfather's home, and I get another telegram from Carol. Have you taken the foreign? And so finally I said, okay, she's not gonna get off my back. And so I finally take the test and I pass it. And so I contact her, and make a long story short, it's thanks to Carol Ludwig that I was able to join the Foreign Service. In fact, years later, when I was the staff aide to Ambassador Michael Armacost, remember Mr. Gayatsu during the Gulf War? Well, I worked for him. And all of a sudden, here's Carol Ludwig. She was a big shot by then in Washington, in PD circles. And I said, what are you doing here? Kind of thing. And I really am eternally grateful to her, as well as to previous people. And as I said before, that you just need to meet the right people to help you out. And so that's how I got into the Foreign Service.
And actually, we were contemporaries in Tokyo at the time.
Oh,
I was 83, 84, and I remember that visit, although I was not out. I was not meeting the president.
right. Well, I wasn't either. I was just helping the setup, helping Carol in her operation. But it turned out very well.
Shibusawa's great-granddaughter?
I knew the great-granddaughter.
Was our colleague here at the University of Hawaii some years back. She's found on, am I right? Looking at Patrice over
So
there.
it'd probably be a great-great-granddaughter, because I knew the great-great-grandson.
You're getting old.
Yeah, so.
Hey, wait, because we're here. If we're in Tokyo at the
He
same
called
time.
me old little while.
By the way, my master's thesis was on, well, it has nothing to do with Shibuzaishi, forget it. All right.
So I'm going to take us a little further back to your studies and advice for students. And then I've got a couple more, and then we've got an audience here and we can open up for some questions. But we are here as part of a program that's helping introduce students for career possibilities. And maybe you can talk to students who are thinking about this. What advice would you have for either courses that might be valuable, other activities in college that you would encourage them to be paying attention to, anything along those lines?
I might as well start off. I think although area studies is important, it's also very important to have the job knowledge, to have the skills to do the job that you're going out there to do. If you're an economic officer, you ought to know a little bit about economics and about trade and about the agencies in the United States that deal with trade. And so it's very important to get that kind of background. You also have to be able to write well. Yeah. Writing is critical. Whether it's for government or for business or for some NGO, if you're overseas, your headquarters is back in the United States someplace. And you have to be able to explain to the people who are halfway around the world what's going on. And you have to be able to argue for your policies or for your programs in writing. You may want to make a phone call, you may want to do it online sometime, but they need to have a record of what the decisions are made. The auditors are always looking around, and they need to have some kind of a record. So you have to learn how to write well. And I think those are key. Area studies is good, but I think it ought to be specific to the country where you're going to. This is Asia studies, and as I mentioned earlier to our moderator here, to Mark, Asia is a big country, and Japan isn't the same as Korea, and Korea is not the same as Thailand, and Thailand isn't Indonesia. So you have to be specific about the country that you're going to study. Learn a little bit about their history. Why do they think and act the way they do? And a lot of history, a lot of countries in Asia have at one time been colonies of either Europe or the United States in one case. And that has affected how they perceive the world. And a lot of nations in Africa and even in Asia, their boundaries were created by the Europeans. And they've squeezed different ethnic groups into arbitrary boundaries and called it a country. So you have to be aware of that kind of thing, but it ought to be specific. But the key is, if you're going to do economic work, political work, public diplomacy work, if you're going to work for an NGO that does a development aid or takes care of the environment or takes care of refugees, you have to know what you're doing. That's really important. Otherwise, the best language skills aren't going to help you that much.
What Jim said basically, same for me, but maybe the priority would be a little different. For me, I found that if you're studying Japanese or Korean, or even obviously Chinese, the kanji, hanja, hanji is very important. And what's so important about learning Japanese characters, especially after 2 or 3 years after you've gotten to the point where you can start talking, right? But if you really want to increase vocabulary, and that's the goal, and to sound like you're smart or smart enough, you really need to focus on that kanji and hanja and hanji, because and it'll take you time. But once you learn kanji, hanja, hanji, it's so great in terms of you can even make up words you think. I remember I was in North Korea. I was supporting Secretary Albright's trip to Pyongyang, and I was talking to a person, and we talked in Japanese because my Korean wasn't that great, and there was a word that I couldn't communicate. So I did the kanji, or they would say hanja, and I said this kind of thing. And so it's really critical that you increase vocabulary, and the way you're going to do it is through kanji, by learning. I was thinking of bringing my kanji book, the classic book that I've had for 40 years, but I forgot that. But that's the most important point. And then I would say the other thing is that you've got to learn. You've got to learn whether you really want to do what you say you want to do. A lot of people will say, yeah, I want to go to Japan and do whatever kind of thing, but they've never been to Japan. And so, or to Korea or to Thailand, the 3 countries. But I've known people who eventually go to those countries and realize, oh, that's really not for them. So as early in the process as possible, you really need to get to the country. You need to get past the wow factor and get to those countries and talk to the people, get to know these people, and realize whether it's for you or not. And in some cases it's not, but you're never going to realize it until you get there. So
East Asian languages are a hassle. I'll be honest with you. The State Department has categories of language. There's world languages, there's hard languages, and there's super hard languages. And East Asia's got the super hard language, except for Arabic and Russian. They have the Japanese and the Korean and the Chinese, and they take 2 years, each of them, to be able to even consider yourself halfway qualified to go there and do a job. So it's tough. Some of the other languages are considered hard, but not world languages. Your Thai and your Vietnamese and your Cambodian and Lao and Thai are the same pretty much. Burmese, they're tough. They're tough languages. The writing is difficult. Kanji or Hanja. Poor Frank stayed years studying kanji and Hanja and ended up in South Sudan.
yeah.
So,
well, that's one of
the problems we have.
Related to that. So I've been going to Africa the last 3 years. And so my first 2 tours, Gabon, Djibouti, I said, they're going to make me a French specialist. And so I started studying French on the weekend in town. And what did they do? The next assignment, we want to send you to South Africa. I said, but they don't speak French there. So I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's true. And also, as far as whether you're going to enjoy it or not, I think you'll find after you've been to a lot of different assignments that no matter where you go, people around the world are pretty much the same. We concentrate a lot on the differences, whether somebody bows or they why or they shake hands or whether they hand you a name card and make you study it word for word or whatever. But the key is everybody has the same aspirations for life. They all want their kids to live better than they did. They all want their kids to get a good education. They all want to be safe. They all want to be comfortable. And they all have the same values. Nobody likes to steal or to fight or to hurt each other. It's pretty standard all the way around the world. So no matter where you go, you have to realize the people there are going to share the same values that you do, basically. And whether you're going to be happy there or not is going to be determined by where you're working to a great degree, who your colleagues are, who your supervisor is, what it is you're having to do there. Not so much about the country you're in. The country you're in could be very poor and have bad infrastructure. The power may go out all the time and the water may not be any good. But you can accommodate those. You're able to do things, put generators in your house, distillers for your water. You can take care of those kind of problems. As long as you are open with people and honest with people and you listen to what they say and you interact with people, you can get along with the country. But it's your colleagues that are your problem. Okay? It's your supervisors that are the problem. Sometimes it's your headquarters that's the problem. You may be put overseas and Washington's telling you to do something that you don't agree with and you think is really stupid. But you've been ordered to do it. And you can fight and argue about it, but eventually you're going to lose. So that's what makes you happy or not happy.
In line with that, it's probably an old Japanese expression, but I always remembered sumeba miyako. Basically, wherever you go, enjoy it and make the best of it, kind of thing. And I never forgot that. There's always got to be something good about wherever you're going. So it makes life better.
Let me go back for a second to the day-to-day work. Because your comment earlier, you talked about that you supported Secretary of State Albright on her trip to North Korea. What does that mean? When you are supporting a Secretary of State on a trip to North Korea, what are you doing in that role?
Well, I think Jim should,
Well,
he better understands that role.
we oftentimes say we're carrying the bags. And our Secretary Albright, she was short, so she had to step.
Give him a second, let him finish that.
And so she couldn't stand behind the podium because she was too short. So we had to carry the step from one venue to the next venue to make sure she had a step on.
You've had a career that...
We do things like that. A lot of it depends on who the visitor is. If it's a Secretary of State, they have relatively limited staff. If it's a presidential visit, there are 650 people come along with the president. And they have 25 airplanes will come in with the president. And so you have to get the airplanes in, make sure that they can land and be taken care of and unloaded and things moved around. You have to work on the schedule. Who is the person going to meet? How long are they going to be meeting? What are they going to talk about? What's the venue going to be? Is there going to be a press thing after that? Who's going to set up the press? Who's going to be invited to the press thing? What's the format going to be? Is there going to be a dinner? Where's the dinner? Who's going to go? What are they going to wear? You have to get all that has to be lined out step by step for that person. And so they have their own staff that has to do that, but we are the ones that would have to introduce them to the venues, introduce them to the people they have to be working with, explain to them how things are going to be done, and then get all of the material, a pipe and drape that goes behind the cameras for the TV audience not to see, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes you have to build bleachers for an event with the press if there's going to be a speech given. So it's all of that kind of logistic support. And you have to sometimes even draft the talking points for all of these meetings.
So, and you didn't even mention security, which I assume is itself.
Security, they have their own security. Okay? The president has 150 to 200 security officers. They have security cars, security vehicles. Their security manages their motorcade. They have counter snipers on the building. They have things monitoring the air, make sure there's no gas around. And there's all this other stuff that they're doing. And basically all we have to do is get the host to allow them to bring their guns in, because Americans have to have guns. Japanese resent that, but they allow it. The Indians didn't know it happened. The Chinese, when they were told. Things like that.
Frank, do you want to add anything there?
No, that's fine.
Well, before we get to go over this to Q&A, this is, let me take us to a couple wrapping it up. The first one would be sort of a two-part question, but I think the first part is obvious. Did you have fun in your career? And in that, what was your best day?
I had fun now that I'm not doing it. A lot of things in life are that way, Yeah. Your memory works kind of funny. You always remember the good things and you forget about the bad things.
So what was a good thing?
Kind of a good thing. Retirement was good. I liked it. That was very helpful. Actually, there were a lot of things that I found very rewarding. In the beginning, we all have to do consular work. That's a requirement.
And can you explain what that is?
Consular work means you're taking care of Americans who are doing stupid things, oftentimes overseas. They're getting arrested, they're getting into fights, they're getting sick, they lose their passports, all kind of little things. You have to take care of the Americans overseas, and you do visa interviews. There's two kind of visas: the immigrant visas for people coming here to live, and then there's the non-immigrant, the students, tourists, and business people who come here. And you have to process that. Everybody who comes here nowadays has to be interviewed in person. Some of our embassies, consulates in India, for example, in Madras, they have to interview like 1,500 people a day in 8 different languages.
I mentioned one of our Richardson Law
Chennai.
School, our Richardson grads is in the Foreign Service, and I think he's in one of those India consulates doing consular work.
India and China are monsters. Thankfully, we don't have good relations with the Chinese, so we don't have to bother with them so much. But the Indians are supposed to be our friends. So you have 1.2 billion people. And if the number of travel, and it's expanding economically at a very rapid rate. The middle class is bigger than the United States population. But they still have 700 million poor people. Right? But even with the middle class, if they go up, if the number of travelers increase by 0.005%, you're talking about 2 million more visa applicants in a year. It's just a horrendous rush of people when you have that larger base of population. And so it's a burden that they have to do, and the consular officers have to handle all these people coming through. But you do meet people. Consular affairs is one of those where it's the only one, really, where you have contact with ordinary people in that country. The political, economic guys, they're dealing with highly educated people most of the time. Very often they're dealing with English-speaking counterparts in the ministries of the host nation or high-level business people. You're doing consular work, you're dealing with the individual person that's out there and the individual American who has a problem. And if you can help somebody, it ends up being very rewarding. You know, people say they hate it, but it's the only thing that gives you a real contact and gives you a true feeling of having accomplished it. You're doing political and economics work. It's almost an academic thing. You're interviewing people, you're writing up what they say, you're reporting back, you're hearing back from Washington what to do, and it goes back and forth. Whether anything really practical happens from what you're saying may take years to find out. But in a consular case, if somebody gets arrested because they were an American and the relationship is bad, and you're able to go there and take care of that person and get them out of jail and out of the country, you feel good. It's an accomplishment right there in your hands. So those things happen.
Right?
Yes, 2 points. One, in terms of the issue of fun, I won't identify the ambassador, but a certain ambassador asked me to set up a visit, and I said, "Mr. Ambassador, do you want to do something fun?" And he says, "I'm not here to have fun. You know, I'm here to solve the problem." And I never forgot that. And but besides fun, I would say, you know who it is, right? Okay. And then, but the second point is
He didn't like me.
yeah. But the second point is not so much fun, but rewarding. And it's not Asia specific, but probably the most rewarding work I did was from 2015 to 2017. I worked very closely to basically rebuild Mosul Dam in northern Iraq, and that was a major effort and a major priority of the Obama administration, and I'll never forget that work. And so, if you're interested in more about Mosul Dam, Google Mosul Dam, world's most dangerous dam, and I worked on that to fix it.
Today's been a good day as well. We're very grateful for your coming on board, taking the time to speak to us, speak to students and faculty. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else here did. Please allow us to give you a round of applause. Thank you. And we look forward to having you back.